Finally. Okay, great. Whew. All right, let's get started with Spinoza. Hopefully you have all your books. So let's review a little bit what we talked about last time, and then we'll get deeper into this text, right? So let's remember what Spinoza is trying to do, right? This is really about dealing with internal darkness, internal depression, internal negative thoughts, negative emotions, which for Spinoza are the basic cause of our misery in this world, right? It doesn't even matter what happens. If you are good internally, you can navigate anything, right? So he's going to teach us, the key he's trying to give us through this text is to really show us how we can bring our internal being to a state of joy where where it doesn't matter what happens outside of us. If we can master ourselves, our internal lives, we are going to actually make it, right? We're going to actually find joy no matter what. Now, I see some of you still have your hands up, and I'm confused if it's a question or if it's just okay. So Abid, Papazidis, put down your hands if you don't have a question, and then of course if you do have a question, I'll get you in a second. Okay. So last time, can anyone remind me what for Spinoza is the source of our sorrows? When we are sorrowful, what is the reason for that, according to Spinoza? Anybody remember? And you can just speak up, or you can raise your hand and I can get you. Dia, you want to answer that? Or Mirza?
Is it like the lack of knowledge of like a situation? Like if you don't know the whole story, then you're just more sorrowful because of it?
Exactly. Right. We have no knowledge. We have only partial knowledge of a given situation. Spinoza speaks of it in terms of inadequate knowledge. I'll write it in the chat so you have it. Inadequate knowledge, right? And he says, when we have an unclear vision of what is happening, of course, we're going to be unhappy. And especially we are unhappy because when we have an unclear vision, we cannot act, right? The unclear vision is that we are not able to act. We are in a way disempowered by the situation. And this, he says, is an unclear vision. We are always potentially powerful, but we sense that we are disempowered. We sense that we have no power. And we take it as though it was the truth, right? So for example, right, you fail an exam and now you're going to fail the class. Everything is out of your power. You feel disempowered. And of course, immediately sorrow kicks in, right? And Spinoza would say, well, you need to gain adequate knowledge of the situation. Maybe there's something bigger going on, right? And as you gain adequate knowledge, you gain more power and you gain more joy. So let's practice on this example. Suppose you failed the class or you're failing the class. You have no power. You're sad. What could you do to gain what might be an adequate vision of the situation that could then give you power and joy, even though you failed the class? Anybody give me an example of how you could adequately look at the situation? Dia, you want to try again? I see your hand.
My bad, I forgot to put it down.
Do you want to answer the question?
Can you repeat it? Sorry.
So you're failing the class, you're feeling disempowered, therefore sad. What kind of knowledge could you gain about the situation? We're practicing on an example, right? How could you see the situation more adequately, which would give you more power and therefore more joy?
I guess like talking to you and like figuring out what you're doing wrong and holding yourself accountable and like making the changes.
Okay, very good. Now, what if I'm a jerk and I'm like, it's over, you're gonna fail, that's it, I'm not changing. What could you do now? Is there something you could do still to see the situation in its truth?
Just take the class. Sorry.
Go ahead, yeah, and raise your hands, guys. It's easier for me to navigate when you're.
So go ahead.
Who was it? Who spoke?
It was me. I was just gonna say, just retake the course, and then you have a better vision of what you're getting into, and then hopefully you'll pass it the second time.
That's good, except I want you to think just on the level of your mind, right? You're not doing any action yet. You're active in your mind, right? So how could you see? This is about changing your perspective, right? You're failing the course. You're not yet taking action. You're trying to see it in a broader perspective, right? So how could you look at the situation in a way that would immediately make you feel more empowered and therefore give you more joy? So you're failing the class no matter what.
Okay.
What do you do now?
I would just analyze the situation and just remember at the end of the day that it's just a course. I mean, it is your education, but I would look at all the good things you took out of the course, all the bad things, and you still learn something at the end of the day. That's what I would do personally.
Exactly. Or you could tell yourself, okay, this is what I did wrong this time, right? This time through. Let me see how I can better myself, right? So this is all, nothing is changing in your life, right? This is all activity in your mind, right? This is all you gaining full knowledge of the situation. So you're basically realizing, okay, I'm failing the course. I have that knowledge, but I also have the knowledge that I can do better. I can change. This is what I need to make, to improve, and so forth. And at that moment, as you're looking in a broader perspective, right, you are now becoming more active, and therefore you're becoming more joyful. Does that make sense? Everybody understands the process? We talked about this last time. We're just reviewing. Wave at me if you're understanding what I'm saying. If you're with me, I want to see some waves. Just wave in the camera. If no one is waving, only one person is waving. Okay, okay, good. Okay, good. All right, so you're following, right? So it should be okay. Okay, so that's the idea, right? Now we're going to look at another today before we get into adequate knowledge in detail, right? We're going to look at, oh, is there a question, Cass Gonzalez? You have questions? I see you have hands. No? Okay.
No, sorry.
All right. No worries. Okay. All right, today we're going to look at another way that we have inadequate knowledge, right? The first inadequate knowledge is knowledge through the body. Remember, we talked about this. It's not when we feel sad, it's often that we just feel how the thing makes us feel, right? Rather than what the thing really is, right? Remember, you failed the class, now you feel, this is horrible, but you don't have a clear knowledge of the thing in itself. Or someone, says something, and now you're just feeling a reaction without really knowing what they really are truly as a person, right? So we saw last time that a lot of our inadequate knowledge is the way that everything is processed through our body, right? Let me make sure you write this down, right? Just to review, a lot of our inadequate knowledge is simply the way that we process reality through our body. In other words, we sometimes just know how that thing makes us feel, but we don't know anything about that thing in itself. Are you following? Right? Usually we just get, this is how this makes me feel. This is how my body is taking this situation. And this is not adequate knowledge of what the thing actually is, right? And the best example of this is when someone says something and now you're reacting and you're now judging them and yelling at them or something without really knowing what they truly meant or whether it was meant with an evil intent. You're just reacting because that's how it made you feel. Does that make sense? Right? Or you're failing the class and now you feel miserable, and now you're not gonna really have any knowledge of the thing itself. Are we good with this notion of inadequate knowledge, as it's inadequate because we just know how we feel about it? We don't know anything about the actual situation. Are you good with that? Everybody with me on that? Let's review. Wave at me if you're with me. Okay, good. All right. Now, there's a second type of inadequate knowledge, which we didn't talk about last time. And this time it is knowledge mediated by the mind. Okay, now this is your mind that is going to create some trouble. And so rather than reality being filtered through your body, it is now filtered through the mind. I'll give you an example, right? So for example, let's imagine that you think that, let's see, you have a friend, and for you, the definition of friendship is that that person never criticizes you. Are we good? Right? That's your definition of friendship. You're a good friend if you take me as I am and if you don't criticize me. Right? Now, suppose this friend comes up one day and starts to criticize you, right? Now, immediately, what are you going to think? This friend is, how are you going to think?
Or my friend.
Exactly. You're not my friend. You're a bad friend. Who does that, right? How dare you do that, right? This is not a sign of friendship. So you're a bad friend, and therefore I'm going to dump you, right? Now, notice how you have filtered what just happened through your expectations or your ideas of what a good friend is supposed to be like. And now, because they don't meet your expectations, boom, you have decided they're a bad friend. Are you see? Now, does that necessarily mean they're a bad friend? What do you think? If we were to think more broadly, is it necessarily a bad friend who criticizes you? What do you think? Nor, go ahead. See you.
It's not necessarily a bad friend, but it also depends on the type of criticism. Like the only problem I've had with like Spinoza's stuff is like there's some things people do that even if you know why they did it, it doesn't make you feel any better about it.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Absolutely. But in this particular case, right, you can realize that, well, okay, the fact in their world, right, criticism, right, there are people like that. They think that
they weren't trying to be a bad friend.
Right. Or in their world, criticism is a sign of friendship, right? Maybe in their, right, their expectations of a good friendship is you tell me when I'm doing something wrong. Like I expect that. So now they're right. So this is the first way, right? The second way, rather, that we get inadequate knowledge. We judge someone based on our expectations. If they don't meet our expectations, boom, they're immediately seen as bad. And of course, when we see them as bad, when we realize they don't meet our expectations, do we feel active or passive? Imagine you have a friend constantly not meeting your expectations. How are you feeling in the friendship? Are you feeling empowered or disempowered? Disempowered, right, Romero? Right? Absolutely. You're feeling, oh my goodness, they keep on, they keep on going against my expectations. They're not meeting my expectations. Now I'm feeling disempowered, and boom, now you're feeling depressed, angry, resentful. Are you following how another way we create sorrow for ourselves? Are you seeing this? That's the second way that we create sorrow for ourselves, by having expectations, and all of a sudden, of course, people will never meet our expectations, and so we feel disempowered, like we do not control them, and immediately we fall into sorrow, right? Let's look at the quote for that, page 89. So turn with me to page 89 in your books. Okay, so this is the third paragraph. This seems to have been, wave at me if you're there. This seems to have been, just, I need a couple waves before I start reading. So this is page 89, third paragraph. I'm starting right at the top. This seems to have been, who is with me? Just, okay, one wave, Bell is with me. Who else is with me? Sanchez, okay, thank you. All right, so I'm gonna read that paragraph and you're going to get a sense of what I just said. Okay, this seems to have been the first signification of these words, but afterwards, men began to form universal ideas. Okay, so we form ideas, expectations of how the world should be, right? They began to think out for themselves types of houses, buildings, castles, and to prefer some types of things to others. Now, here's the line you underline. And so it happened that each person called a thing perfect, which seemed to agree with the universal idea which he had formed of that thing, right? So we call something good or perfect if it fits our expectations of how that thing should be, right? Of course, life doesn't work that way. Nothing works with our expectations. And so we are constantly sorrowful and disempowered, right? So he continues, right? And on the other hand, we call a thing imperfect, which seems to agree less with his typical conception, although, etc. Right? So you're seeing here in this quote that he's saying we start to divide the world in perfect and imperfect according to our ideas of how the world should be. But as soon as we start to do that, impose our ideas on the world, what do you think is going to happen? Is the world going to bend down to our ideas? What is the world going to do? Does the world fit into our expectations of how things should be? Yes or no? Hurry up and answer so I can keep going. Okay, thank you, Romero. Thank you, right? So absolutely, the world doesn't fit in our expectations. And so now we feel disempowered. We're like, oh, the world is out of my control. It's not fitting into how it should be. And now you're sad and sorrowful. Are you seeing how one way to get out of the sorrow would be what, based on what we just read? What would be the way out? Now that you know the way into your sorrow, what would be the way out? What would be a way to feel less miserable, knowing that it is your expectations that make you miserable? What would be the way out? Gonzalez.
Creating your own biases and creating your own expectations, not trying to live up to what society says is good or bad.
Careful, this is different. This is you making society bend to your expectations. This is different, right? This is you have expectations, your friend doesn't meet your expectations. Now your friend is a bad friend. Okay, and now of course you feel disempowered because your friend is not doing what you want them to do, and now you feel sad. So based on what I just said now, what would be a way out of this sorrow that you're going to feel because of your expectations? What would be a way out? So it's a little different from what you're saying, Gonzalez. Romero?
A way to avoid it would to be not having expectations when going into things, not necessarily preparing for the worst, but always expecting that something can go wrong and that nothing is going to adhere to your own thought process.
Right. And even not thinking that something could go wrong beyond that, right? Because wrong is still you saying, it should be like this. And now it's wrong. And now, of course, you're going to be miserable. So you're just saying, okay, don't be a little more relaxed. But Spinoza is going to say, we need to get rid of those expectations altogether. Because if we have expectations, we're going to be disempowered. But the moment where we just welcome whatever comes our way as an interesting experience or an interesting person, right? We are not going to be disappointed and we're not going to be disempowered, right? And therefore, we're going to be much more joyful. In general, actually, if you observe, non-judgmental people are happier than judgmental people, right? Why? Because they're not trying to constantly bend the world to their expectations and feeling disempowered and therefore feeling sad. Are you following? So this is an attitude that he's suggesting we take, right? If we want to get more into the adequate ideas, right? We need to be open to whatever is coming and open to learning about it. What is there to learn here? What is there to discover here? What is there to explore in this person or in this situation? And when we have this kind of open mind, right, we begin to see more adequately what's happening, right? And then we gain more power and therefore more joy. Are you following? So it's a little, it's pretty, it's several steps you have to take. Who is following what I'm saying? Wave at me. Who has a question? Raise your hand. Who is not understanding what colors? Go ahead. You have a question. Go ahead. Colors, you have a question, or were you waving at me?
I was waving.
Oh, okay, good. All right. So everybody understands. Okay, Romero, go ahead. Do you have a question?
Can you just repeat that, because I had someone come in, so I wasn't able to focus. Thank you.
Yes, please write this down, guys. This is important, right? One other way that we have inadequate ideas is because we have expectations of how things should be. And of course, the world is not going to bend down to our expectations, right? And so when this happens, when we have expectations and the world doesn't bend down to our expectations, we feel disempowered. That's step 2. We feel disempowered. We feel like the world is not letting us control it. And step 3, therefore, says Spinoza, we're sad, we're sorrowful. Remember, sorrow comes when we have no power, and joy comes when we have power, right? So because now we have these expectations, we are disempowering ourselves because the world is never going to obey our expectations, right? So one way out of it, right, now moving to the next step, one way out of it would be to lose the expectations, to look at reality with a more adventurous approach, right? A more exploratory approach. Oh, let's see what this is an interesting situation that I'm in right now. I lost my job. I don't have any money. Let me just see what I can explore or learn or experience in this situation, rather than judging this is good and bad and feeling disempowered. At that moment where you have a more adventurous, exploratory attitude towards the person or the situation, you're becoming more active. And at that moment, you're becoming more joyful. Even though you lost your job, you can be completely joyful, thinking, oh, I wonder what I'm going to do now. Let's see. This is interesting. What can I experience? What can I learn? This is a brand new situation. How intriguing. You see how you're shifting your attitude. You've let go of your expectations. You're just open-endedly receiving the situation or the person with a kind of adventurous approach, right? Mirza, go ahead.
So I have a quick question. Are you saying that we should keep our expectations low?
No expectations, nothing.
Don't
That's
have
what you would
expectations.
suggest, right? So, for example, you have let's go now with people. We looked at a situation. Let's go now with people. Suppose you have a child. This often happens, and your parents certainly. How many of you have parents who are miserable with you? Who are really unhappy with where you're headed? Anybody? Parents who are disappointed in you and giving you, okay, one, Mirza, okay. So and Gonzalez, okay. So why is that the case, right? When you have a child and now your parent is had some expectations about you. You should be this, you should be that. And you're going in a totally different direction, Mirza and Gonzalez, right? And the parent, of course, now feels disempowered and miserable. Whereas what they could do is tell themselves, maybe that path that my child is taking is an interesting path, right? Maybe I can be open to that possibility. Do you see what I'm saying? Mirza and Gonzalez, is this helping you? So you can help your parents? Maybe, right? So Mirza is hopeless already. But that is a way that we as parents become miserable with our kids because we set expectations what they should be instead of welcoming their unique path, right? Or destiny. And we can do this with anybody. You can have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and now you have expectations how a boyfriend's supposed to act. And of course, they're not doing that. And now you're miserable, right? Why not instead try to ask yourself, okay, they're a little different. They're a bit quirky. Let me see how I can look at this in a broader perspective, so that, I can, not have the expectation, but rather welcome this person with their difference, right? Of course, now there are limits, obviously, to this view. If the boyfriend or girlfriend or the parent is becoming abusive, this is, right? There's a minimum of things you have, but I'm saying in general, right? If it's not a dangerous or abusive situation, many times we would be much more joyful if we let go of the expectations and allow the person to be who they are, right? That's kind of where Spinoza is headed. Are we good so far? Everybody with me? Okay. Now, so we have now the two ways that we have inadequate thinking. And in conclusion, what we're noticing, right? And this actually helps me a lot too. Anytime I'm sad, I can just remind myself, oh, I just don't have adequate knowledge yet. Let me seek adequate knowledge and I can get rid of this sadness, right? Most of us, we hang on to the sadness. You know why? Because we think the sadness is saying the truth about the situation. We think the sadness is the right response to a real reality, right? And so we hang on to the sadness as though it's speaking the truth. But what Spinoza is saying is, anytime you're sad, there is an inadequate idea somewhere. You are not seeing the whole picture. That is why you are sad. You're not seeing the whole picture. Either your mind is too narrow and you're not able to see the whole scope, or your body is just reacting. So that's the idea. So this is really an invitation when we are sad to ask ourselves, do I have the full picture? Or am I just reacting to how I feel? Or am I just, disappointed because my expectations were not met? Are you seeing the two ways that you're inadequate, right? So the key, of course, is to begin to move towards adequate knowledge. And of course, Spinoza is going to give us some clues how to do that, right? But that's the key. Once we move to adequate knowledge, we become more active. And as a result, we become more joyful, right? Okay. So let's go now. I think I read, one more thing about good and evil, still connected with the expectations. Go to page 90, second paragraph. With regard to good and evil, everybody with me? Wave at me if you're there. Okay, one wave, two waves. Okay, let's go. Okay, with regard to good and evil. So this is so interesting. Spinoza is about to tell us that good and evil are not actually in reality. Good and evil are in our mind. It's very interesting. So he says that with regard to good and evil, these terms indicate nothing positive in things considered in themselves. In other words, nothing is inherently good. Nothing is inherently evil, right? And so he continues, they are nor are they anything else than modes of thought or notions which we form from the comparison of one thing with another. In other words, something is never good in itself or bad or inherently bad. It is us who determine this is good because it fits my expectations. This is bad because it doesn't fit my expectation. So Spinoza is really leading us into a world where there is no good and bad. Bad you have to avoid, good you have to do. No, he's saying it's all in your head. You determine this is good because it fits with what you think is good. And then you determine that is bad because it doesn't fit with your notion of good. And now you're going in the world, judging everything. This is good, this is bad, this is good, this is bad, and dealing with all this evil that makes you feel powerless. And now you, of course, you're going to be miserable. By the way, it's so interesting because the the Eastern religions, right, Buddhism and so forth, they are all trying to get us out of this good and bad mentality. I don't know if you're familiar, but one of the ways you become enlightened in the Eastern traditions is you stop moving between this good, this bad, dichotomy, you start to rise above it, because that's when you attain bliss. And Spinoza is saying the same thing. He's saying, stop judging the world. This is good, this is bad, because each time you encounter something that doesn't meet your expectations, going to be bad, and you're going to be disempowered, and you're going to be miserable. So for example, right, there's so many ways we do this, right? How many of you, well, let's start, just let me take you where you are. How many of you have parents who have decided that something you're doing is bad? Anybody? And you don't think so? Anybody have this? That, I mean, we should all have this, that our parents to a certain degree think that what we're doing is bad, and you don't think is bad. Who is right? Okay, I see a lot of hands, right? Okay, are your parents, what do you think? Are they right to think that what you're doing is bad? What do you think is the problem? Mirza, tell us.
I think it was like in a way of protecting me somehow. That's how I think about it. What I did wasn't bad. I don't think it was bad.
Okay, but why do
I
they
think they
think
were
it was
trying
bad? Why do they think
I
it was
think
bad?
I think it was like it was like a way of protecting me for like the future or something.
But you
Like,
didn't think it was bad.
no, I
You
did not.
didn't think you were in danger.
Nope.
Okay, so you see how for the parents it's bad, because according to their mindset, he needs to be protected, he cannot do this. And Mirza is saying, no, according to my mindset, this is good, I need to do this for my future, right? Noor, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's also based on their expectations of what's going to happen to you if you do that, especially if they've done something similar in the past and it ended up for them in a certain way. They might fight against you doing something because it just didn't go well for them.
Exactly, right? They have an idea of what your future should look like. This is why they're saying, don't do this, because that future that we have set up for you is not going to work, right? But you might have a different future in your mind, right? And so you can see how many times not only our parents or people around us, but we do that to other people. You have a sibling. Suppose you have this just happened recently. In my family, right? I have a family member. We had a vision for what he should do next year. All of us, we had the same vision. We were all very happy with that vision. And this guy, he messes it up. Everybody's angry with him now because he didn't follow the vision. And at the same time, I'm studying Spinoza and I'm like, oh, I see. Maybe we should impose our vision on this guy and let, because not necessarily bad what he decided to do. It's just a different vision, right? And so we're all miserable for 2 months. All of us were, calling and texting, saying how miserable we were with this person because they didn't fulfill our expectations. But really, the problem was us. We had expectations. We created a vision, a notion of what is good for this person and what is bad for this person, and we became miserable as a result. The better thing would have been to say, okay, you have this different vision, and that's cool. Go for it, right? Just because it doesn't fit with what I think is good doesn't mean that is bad, right? So already there's a very deep, deep wisdom here. And the day you stop doing this is good, this is bad, this is good, this is bad, you will notice immediately your mood will lift. I have tried this, right? Spend the day without judging, just being like, oh, okay, this is different. I was in such a good mood the whole day that I'm never like that. Usually I'm always, why are they doing this? And why are they doing that? And I'm so tired of these guys, right? And I'm not constantly keeping myself in a disempowered, sorrowful situation. So are you seeing how the second way, right, would be to avoid good and evil, avoid judgments of good and evil, and you're going to be a much happier person, according to Spinoza. Everybody follows me? Wave at me if you're with me. Any questions so far before we get into the key that he's going to give us, which we've already hinted at? Anybody have any questions or preoccupations? Gonzalez, go ahead.
I agree with everything you said, and I've been following this philosophy without knowing it for a long time. But what do you do in this modern world? Just a question for you, with people who don't understand this philosophy, because you can be very easygoing and try to understand, but if people don't get the answer that they're expecting from you, sometimes they sort of think that you're like almost better than them, or you're like, look at this guy, he's so enlightened. This has happened to me personally a few times.
Right. So obviously, right, you're not responsible for the happiness of others, right? It's their choice to remain miserable about you, right?
Yeah.
So you can't really change that. You can keep yourself at peace, right? And remember, Spinoza, I think I told you, he was somebody whom everyone hated, right? Everyone hated this poor guy. right? His whole family and whole community excommunicated him just for thinking what he thought, right? So I think he was used to realizing that I can keep myself stable, I can keep myself happy, but I'm not responsible for your happiness because that's your path, right? Part of not saying what is good or evil is not judging their path, right? And seeing, okay, well, that's your path. That's how you're going to do this. How interesting, how intriguing. But you're not going to think to yourself, oh, they're doing something bad. Because as soon as you think they're doing something bad, boom, you're going to be miserable. Do you follow me, Gonzalez? So,
Yes.
so just be intrigued. Oh, how intriguing, that you are thinking this about me, right? You can be curious, but as soon as you begin to make a judgment, like, this jerk is judging me, right? Now you're judging them, right? And now you're bringing yourself down, right? So that's the key, is to you keep yourself. The rest is neither your problem, nor is it your expertise, right? We cannot know what their path is, right? This is something that everyone has to find for themselves. So good. Does that answer your question a little bit, Gonzalez?
Yes, it does. I think Romero wants to pick up.
Yes, Romero, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to point out the fact how we're saying that, his entire thing is avoid, the idea of something being good or evil. But doesn't he in the book literally talk about how certain emotions are evil and bad and certain emotions are good?
They're not bad. They're simply less active, right? It's very objective. He's saying sorrow is you have less activity. That's why you feel sorry. He's not saying it's bad, right? But he is saying if you want joy, right, you need to cultivate the active emotions, not the passive ones, right? So I don't think I think he's being very scientific about it, right? He's saying you want joy comes with active emotions. Here are the active emotions, here are the passive emotions. So if you want joy, that is what you would choose. But I don't think he would ever say they're bad. Remember, Spinoza doesn't believe that emotions are bad. He doesn't believe passions are bad, right? Like most religious people, or most philosophers, right? He believes this is part of our human nature. We need to understand it. And then we need to cultivate the emotions that are active. So I see what you're saying. Yes, in a way, he's privileging, right, the active emotions, but at no point will he say this is evil. Never will he say that a passion is evil. He's just going to say it's a lesser being. It's a lesser perfection. It's you're less active, right? So it's very neutral, actually. Does that answer a little bit, Romero? Yeah, okay. Jaskovska, I see your hands. Go ahead.
What if your passion is killing?
Why is there always a student like that? Careful. Passion, remember, is a passive emotion, right? So it's less power, right? So if your killing is coming from hate, right? So at that moment, you are experiencing something. Remember, he has sorrow, and then he has all the derivatives of sorrow, resentment, hatred, and so forth. So, of course, Spinoza is not telling us what we should do, should not do. He's saying, if you want to be happy, privilege the happy emotions, the active emotions. If you want to be miserable, privilege hate, privilege killing. So he's not saying killing is wrong ever, right? He's saying, he's just talking about, you want to be happy, this is what you need to cultivate. Does that make sense? So he's not a moral philosopher, right? In that sense, he's not going to tell us killing is bad, adultery is bad. None of that is good or bad for Spinoza. But if you want to be happy, cultivate the active emotions. That's what he would tell the murderer who loves to kill, right? He would say, listen, you cannot be happy if you are harboring all this anger and rage and resentment, right? You will be happy only when you are cultivating the positive emotion, the active emotions. Are you following, Jaskovska?
Gotcha.
Yeah. So even in fact, of course, killing is an activity, right? So in a sense, it brings bliss, right? There's an element of power in killing. You're right. So a murderer would be empowered and joyful in killing, but he's also hindered by the emotions that bring him to kill, right? There, the emotion of hatred, the emotion of resentment. These are disempowering emotions, right? So he would suggest to the murderer, really do a deep work of empowerment on yourself, which includes the emotions. Perhaps that's how we could answer that. Romero, go ahead. And then we need to go on. Go.
I know
Yes.
you're ready for this. I know you're ready for this, but I just looked in the book because like I know I read this. He literally has an entire section that says the evil emotions, and then he literally says,
Oh, show me,
all
show me.
emotions of hatred are evil, and therefore the man who lives according to the guidance of reason.
Great. Okay.
He literally says it. I'm like, he's
That would be an inner contradiction. But show me, okay? Can you tell me after class? Stay after class, and I want to see this.
Okay.
And yes, I can see him writing that. And in that sense, he would be a little bit contradictory, right? I would say that. I would make that judgment. Right, on Spinoza. But if you want to get to the, what he's trying to say in general, right, is there's no good and evil per se, but it's yeah, okay, here we go. I think I can answer you, Romero. There's no good and evil inherently in life, but it is us, right? So for example, anything for Spinoza which decreases your power is evil. Anything which increases your power is good. So in that sense, sadness, hatred are evil emotions, but there's nothing in reality which is good and evil. Does that make sense? That's
yeah, I can see that.
In reality, you don't have good people, evil people, or good situations or evil situations. You only have in the way you perceive evil emotions or evil or good emotions. I think that would clarify. Does that make sense? So it's not a contradiction. Make sense?
I see it, like I see where you're coming from as well, but I just feel like I understand where he's coming from with that, but it's like you got to be very careful with your wording, because if you apply it here, it has to be applied everywhere.
No, because for him, anything which decreases your power is evil. So okay, so in that sense, somebody who wants to murder you could say was evil according to Spinoza, right? But somebody who's living their life over here by themselves, choosing their own destiny, wanting to be, I don't know, an artist instead of a medical doctor, that's not evil. You see what I mean? That's what he's getting at. But yeah, anything that decreases our power. So in that sense, anything that goes against our health, right? Anything that goes against our, boundaries, this is evil. But in itself, the thing is not evil, right? The rapist is not evil in themselves. They're evil when they rape you. You see what I mean? Right, that person inherently is not evil. They're evil when they are doing that to you, right? So, okay, so thank you. That's helping me nuance a little bit, right? There's nothing in reality which is essentially good and evil. Like, for example, there is no place which is evil, no person which is evil, no religion which is evil. Remember, he's talking in a context where he's seen as evil for being an atheist, right? So there's nothing out there which is evil, but anything which limits me is evil. Anything which empowers me is good. And so if you're going to transgress my boundaries, that is evil, right? If I'm going to do something unhealthy to my body, that is evil. But the person over there who's a Catholic or a Muslim or a Buddhist is not evil. Does that make sense? That's where he's going with that. Okay, great. Really good clarification. Okay, let's go now into the adequate knowledge, right? The two forms of adequate knowledge. One which he will call this knowledge of the second kind, and then we have knowledge of the third kind. Okay, so we had knowledge of the first kind, which is inadequate, whether it's the mind or the body, right? Now we're going into knowledge of the second kind, which is reason. And then we'll go into knowledge of the third kind, which he talks about as intuition. So let's go briefly, go to page 75. How are we to gain adequate knowledge of a situation? We've talked about this, but now we'll go into the quotes. On page 75, the third paragraph, the two states of mind, active and passive. Who is there? The two states of mind, wave at me. I need a wave. One wave, two waves, please. Thank you. Okay. All right. So now we're going to the next section, right? How to get adequate ideas. Okay, page 75, third paragraph. In every human mind, some ideas are adequate and others mutilated and confused. But now here's the key. But the ideas which in any mind are adequate in God, insofar as he forms the essence of that mind. While, he continues, those again which are inadequate in the mind are also adequate in God, not as insofar as he contains the essence of that mind only, but insofar as he contains, this is important, he contains the ideas of other things at the same time in himself. Okay, so I'm going to give a religious explanation, and then I'm going to give a secular explanation of this passage, okay? First thing, the religious explanation. I think this is a very practical advice. If you're a religious person, you can immediately kick in, and then we'll go into the secular version of that. If you're dealing with a difficult situation or a difficult person, the best thing to do is to try to gain a God view of the situation, beyond your view, meaning you ask yourself, how does God see the situation? How does God see this person, right? And you can try, in Christianity, there is a beautiful passage which says, I make all my thoughts captive to Christ, right? Or I try to gain the mind of Christ, right? This is the idea, right? I'm speaking more Christian terms, so some of you can understand the religious aspect, right? You can try to gain a God view or a God perspective of the situation, and you can do this through prayer. So imagine you're dealing with a difficult person. So I've practiced this myself. I have a difficult person that I can't stand, and it's like I just, it's like, how am I going to deal with this? I can't even look at them. So I will pray and I'll be like, okay, give me an insight who that person truly is and what I need to see more clearly who that person truly is. And that is how you can gain. And then you get, of course, some inspiration beyond what you're feeling, right? You might be able to see the person's insecurities, or you might be able to see how it's a misunderstanding and so forth. So one way that religiously you can do this, right, is to bring that person to God or that situation to God and ask, let me have your perspective on this, not just mine, right? Okay, so that works for the religious people in the class. Now, what if you're not religious? How can we apply Spinoza? Well, it's the same way. You're looking at the situation and you're telling yourself, based on what Spinoza has said, that there's a wider perspective. The best way to get to this wider perspective is to begin to ask questions, right? What can I learn? What do I need to know? Just being open like this, is there something about this person I should know so that I can endure them better, right? Is there something about this situation? So just simply asking the questions, right? Are they truly evil, or are they also suffering, right? What happened to them, right? So you're asking these questions. Anytime you begin to ask these questions, your mind will broaden and you will gain a deeper insight just by asking these questions, right? So it's the same idea. You're trying to get a broader perspective than just your own. As you begin to explore and to search, are you more active or more passive? Which one is it? You're beginning to explore, you're asking questions, you're wanting to know more about this person, you're wanting to gain insight about this situation, you're kind of really thinking things through with your mind. Are you becoming more active or more passive? Somebody answer. Active. Thank you,
Active.
Beth. Right, very good. As you become more active, are you becoming more sorrowful or more joyful?
Joyful.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Belle and Souvenos. Okay, good. Right? So this is the best way, even though the person is not going to change their behavior. Because you're entering active mode, you're inquisitive, you're curious, you're wondering what made them like this, what can I, how can I learn more about them? You will begin to become more joyful. I'll give you an example. I was living with a teenager for a while who was very disturbed, and she stabbed me in the back like you wouldn't believe. Like she told lies about me and so forth, right? So now I'm really pissed. And she's the Satan to me, right? She's the devil. I need her out of my house. And I'm going on, just reacting to how my body feels, right? And then I remembered Spinoza, and I'm like, okay, let me try and get a broader perspective. So I was just willing to learn more. I mean, I didn't even pray, nothing. I was just willing to see the situation in a broader perspective. The next day, I'm on the plane going somewhere. I'm reading the New York Times on my phone. And I found this article on borderline personality disorder. You guys familiar with that? Most of us are suffering from borderline personality disorder. Is the person either loves you or hates you. And I'm looking at all the symptoms, and that is exactly what the teen that was living with me was suffering from. So now I'm realizing, oh, it's not that she's a brat, right? Is that she's suffering some, heavy mental imbalance, right? And I'm not judging or anything, at that point. I'm realizing she has a mental health issue, right? At that moment, immediately, my emotions start to clear up, right? Because now, first of all, I'm more active. I have a deeper understanding. I'm like, oh, so it's not just, so I have a broader insight into her life, into what she's struggling with. It's not just about me anymore. It's not even that she meant anything bad towards me. It's a general illness that she's struggling with. At that moment, everything cleared up and I found peace, right? I wasn't resentful anymore. I was like, okay, I get it. I see that it's her. She's suffering from this. It's not that she wanted to stab me in the back. Is that this is how she's going to act because of this mental imbalance. Are you following? Right? So, and I didn't even, this had nothing to do with God. I was just open to finding out more. I was curious. How can I see this in a broader perspective? And somehow at that moment, because you're open, you fall on different things will come to you, right? I opened the New York Times and saw this article, or you'll see a book, or someone will say something, and you'll begin to become more insightful, right? It's just being open that you need to do. Let me try to see this from a God view, from a bigger picture view. And the moment you open yourself to that deeper view, you will begin to have it, right? It will come to you. The information will flow to you, right? So that's just an example of how that happened to me, right? I told myself, let me have a bigger view on this. And boom, the next day I came upon this article that really explained it for me, right? Any questions so far or comments before I continue, before we read the quote? Okay, so that's what it means, right? The ideas, let me go back to the text where we were, right? The ideas in my mind that are adequate in God. And then he says, even the ideas that are inadequate, even when I'm confused about someone or something, they are adequate in God because he contains the essence of that mind also, right? The God vision, he sees her, he sees me, he sees all of her past, right? He sees all of my past. And in that sense, only God has the whole picture. And by the way, this means that God is supremely joyful. This is something we forget sometimes. This is another interesting ramification of Spinoza, is that for Spinoza, God is not sitting there in heaven all depressed about us, right? He's not sitting there in heaven all angry about us. God, because he has supreme knowledge, sees the whole picture, therefore has supreme power, is infinitely blissful, right? This is very interesting vision of God, which I haven't seen in any religion except maybe Buddhism, right? But most religions show God to be, kind of an angry, somber, crucified, being all, kind of a very negative, with a lot of negative emotions against us. And what we're learning here as a little byproduct of all this is that God perhaps is incredibly joyful all the time about us because he sees the whole picture. He sees why we're doing things we're doing, where we're going, all the opportunities that we could have to change. And so he is sitting in heaven in a very happy state, right? Perhaps that would be one way to see it, right? To one ramification of this. Okay. So that's the first way, right, that we start to get out of the sorrow, is by forming adequate ideas, by adopting a God view. But now there's a deeper knowledge, which I want to finish with in oh, good, I have some time, 15 minutes, right? There's a deeper knowledge, which she calls knowledge of the third type. So before I go into knowledge of the third type, I want to make sure everybody's good. Anybody have any questions about anything we said so far before we get into this last aspect of Spinoza? Romero, go ahead.
So knowledge of the second kind is what we just discussed. That's the one about widening your perspective by asking questions.
That's through reason, right? You're reasoning, you're curious, you're full of questions and you're wondering. So that's something you can do on your level. This is something that reason does. Knowledge of second types. The first knowledge of the first type, let's review, is the knowledge that the body gives you. Inadequate, right? Or the knowledge that, filter through your expectations. That's also first type, right? But here actually, yeah. Here's the second type. This is adequate knowledge through you wanting to adopt a God view of the situation. Good. Anybody else have a question before I go into the knowledge of the third type, which is very interesting? Okay. So by the way, anyone who studied Plato, you're seeing Plato here. This is the Platonic distinctions between 4 different types of knowledge: hearsay, belief, discursive knowledge, intuitive knowledge. So this is just a side note to those who know Plato, who've read the Republic. This is Spinoza is following the Platonic line that is described in the Republic, right? It's very similar. And just like in Plato, the last type of knowledge, the knowledge of the third kind, is a knowledge that is intuitive. It's an intuition. So let's see what he means exactly. So let me explain it first, and then we'll go into the text, because I'm going to be on page 131. On the next to last paragraph on page 131, but let me first break it down for us, and then we'll read the quote, okay? So this is what happens as you become more and more occupied with knowledge of the second type, right? With your reason, trying to broaden your perspective, you become increasingly joyful, correct? Right? You have a person that's acting weird. You want to have a God view. You're like, okay, I see where they're coming from. They're struggling with a mental illness, or this happened. Okay, I have more knowledge. I'm more blissful. Then you have a situation. It's not going well. You want a bigger perspective. What can I learn? Why is this happening to me? Now you gain a broader perspective that this situation is there to help you grow. Now you're more joyful and you're multiplying the joy, but not only that. Anybody remember the definition of love in Spinoza? There's a very precise definition of love in Spinoza. Anybody remember? I think we can go. It's on, let's try and find it together. I'm trying, this is when in the very first pages, I think, where we talked about a joy and sorrow. Here it is, I found it, page 77. Okay, go to the section on love, which is section 6. Wave at me when you're here. This is page 77, section 6, Roman numeral 6 on the top. They have a definition of love. Wave at me if you're there. I want to see you wave. I want to see at least 2 waves. Okay, thank you, good. Okay, watch this definition. Love is joy with the accompanying idea of an external cause. In other words, love is joy plus an object. So you love someone or something when you look at that someone or that something with joy. Everybody clear? Angeles, you have a question? Or is that just a hand? No? Okay.
Sorry, I just didn't lower it.
Okay, no worries. Okay, so let me say that again, right? Love is, there's an object and you feel joy towards that object. That's love. This is in fact very interesting. There's a very interesting parenthesis I can open here. When you're in a relationship and you start to get, not that you hate the person, but they bring you sorrow, right? That person is going to feel like you hate them, because the definition of love is you give me joy. That's basically what he's saying. Love means I love a given person, means that that person brings me joy. This is interesting because when that person starts to bring us sorrow, we appear to them as though we hate them, right? This is a very interesting little side note, right? Okay, so back to love. Love is, there's an object which brings me joy. Now, let's go back to our difficult person and our difficult situation, right? So going back to me with my teen, right? My teen who is backstabbing me. So as I'm starting to see, oh, she's suffering from this mental illness. It's not really personal what she did. It's something that she would do. It's how she reacts, right? It's how she reacts in a way she can't help herself because she is suffering from this mental illness. Now I'm feeling more joy associated with her. And in a way, I love her now in a way that I didn't before. Love awakens in me for her because I'm seeing, oh, I understand what just happened. And now I feel excited about this understanding. And I see you and I understand you and I'm excited about this new understanding and maybe all the things we can do to help you feel better. At that moment, my love has awakened towards her. Are you following me? So now my heart is filled with love towards this person, even though they're backstabbing me, because I understand more clearly. I feel joyful. I'm joyful about them. That is the definition of love. Everybody follow me so far? Are we good? Wave at me if you're with me. Okay. Now, same thing with the situation. Suppose you flunked the class, right? And you're trying to have a broader perspective. And now you're realizing, oh, this has taught me so much, about being more, on time, being more consistent, doing my homework better. And now I feel like, yeah, I am a better person because I failed the class, right? And so now you're filled with joy. When you think about failing the class, you're now filled with joy. And now the class becomes an object of love. Right? You now, because you have the class there that is giving you joy in a way, right? Based on Spinoza, you are now actually feeling love for that situation. Are you with me? Everybody with me? Are you puzzled? Is this puzzling or are you good? Are you following what he's saying? Okay. So basically what Spinoza is saying is that when we adopt this God view, as we adopt it more and more, we become more and more filled with joy and by product, love, right? And at that moment, we can say very clearly, we have the mind of God. The mind of God is joy and love together, which Spinoza calls bliss or blessedness. At that moment that we are filled with joy about everything that is around us, we have absolutely overcome all unhappiness, right? Because joy for Spinoza is stronger than sadness. Why? because it's active, and sadness is passive. So anything, I mean, put two people together, one that is more active and one that is more passive, one that is more empowered, one that is disempowered. Who wins the fight? If you have a weak person and a strong person, who's going to win the fight? Hurry up and tell me. Who's going to win, the weak one or the strong one? What, Romero? How's the weak person going to win the... Okay, strong one, right? So because all of the active emotions are more, you are more empowered when you feel them, you're more active. They're therefore more strong, stronger than the passive emotions. So if you get to the state when you're filled with joy about everything around you, you have overcome all darkness in your soul. And at that moment, you have reached what Spinoza calls the mind of God. You have reached the state of absolute blessedness or bliss that God is feeling all day long, right? And that's what he means by intuition. Intuition, you don't know or see, you feel. Intuition is immediate contact with God, right? Immediate contact with God is feeling exactly what God is feeling. You're one with God in the sense that you are both now feeling blissful and blessed and joyful, right? So do you see how this is different from knowledge of the second type? Knowledge of the second time, you're just trying to get a broader understanding. Your mind is working very hard. Let me see how I can see this person, how I can see the situation. But as you're doing this, you're developing joy, you're releasing joy in your being. That joy is the very presence of God. At that moment, you are in direct contact with God. That is the intuition of God. That is the knowledge of the third type, which is the knowledge of God. Are you following? It's quite rigorous, Spinoza. You have to do some math, right? Who understands what I'm saying? Who understands? Wave at me if you understand the knowledge of the third type. Okay, let's go to the quotes so we can see exactly what Spinoza says. Okay, go to page 131, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th paragraph, next to last paragraph, where it says blessedness. Wave at me when you're there. Any two waves? Okay, thank you. Blessedness. By blessedness, by the way, he simply means bliss or joy, right? He means that state where you're absolutely happy, right? Blessedness, he says, consists in love towards God, right? Consists in being directly in touch with God, right? And then he says this, which arises from the third kind of knowledge. And this love, therefore, must be related to the mind insofar as it acts. And going further, underline this, blessedness is virtue itself. This is so interesting. Once you feel that joy, you don't need to force yourself to not hate, to not be resentful, to not be depressed. You don't need to do that because you will be naturally disinclined to hate, disinclined to be resentful, and disinclined to be sorrowful. You will be naturally happy without effort. That's why he said blessedness is virtue. When you're feeling joyful about everything that comes your way and every situation and every person, you cannot sin. You cannot be angry. You cannot be resentful. You cannot be sorrowful because you're dwelling in this light that nothing can touch you, right? You have created it through knowledge of the second type. So that's why he's saying you will naturally be a good person when you feel this constant joy. And you can test this. How many of you wake up grouchy and you just hate on everybody that day, right? Anybody like me? Like I wake up grouchy, don't be on my path, right? So, and if you wake up happy, then everybody, even if they push you around, you're going to be smiling and joking and being playful about it. You're going to take it the right way, right? So that's what he's saying. If you're internally happy, you will naturally be good. You don't need to force yourself to not kill, to not commit adultery, to not lie. You will naturally do the right thing because you are actually absolutely in touch with the divine mind. You have the divine mind, and therefore only good can flow from you. And this divine mind you have acquired simply by releasing joy into yourself, right? So that's very important quote, blessedness is virtue itself. You become naturally virtuous when you're joyful. You don't need to work on yourself. Just adopt adequate view of life and joy will fill your soul. And at that moment, everything you do will be good. Are you following? Write this down. The key to being virtuous is not to try to better yourself. And I'm not going to eat this. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to go work out. I'm going to do this. And you're trying to work on yourself and become a better person. So I don't do that. Just begin to develop an adequate view of reality. At that moment, when you start to have the God view of everything, joy will fill your life. And at that moment, naturally, you will be a good person effortlessly. That's how he says you work against that's how you work on yourself. You don't work on yourself at all. Broaden your mind, become filled with joy, and virtue will emanate from you, right? So let's read the rest and then we can close. Again, the more the mind delights in this divine love or blessedness, the more it understands. That is to say, the greater is the power it has over its emotions and the less it suffers from its emotions. There it is, the quote you wanted, Romero, which are evil. Emotions which are evil. Therefore, it is because the mind delights in the divine love and blessedness that it possesses the power of restraining the lusts. And because the power of man to restrain the emotions is in the intellect alone, therefore, no one therefore delights in blessedness. Here's the line you underline. No one delights in blessedness because he has restrained his emotions, but on the contrary, the power of restraining his lust springs from his blessedness, from blessedness itself, right? It's not that you first work on yourself, become a good person, and then you'll feel joy. No, first you feel joy, and then naturally you will be a good person, right? That's the idea. Everybody understands this idea? And you understand how you can have direct knowledge of God, right? Pure joy, create joy, boom, you're in direct contact with God. So you can see, I think we talked about this, Romero, this is not a personal God, right? That you can talk to and who respond. God is a state of being. God is joy. And so in as much as you open yourself to joy, create the right conditions for joy, you will be in direct contact with God and you will be good like God is good, right? That's the idea. Make sense, everybody? Any questions? We have 1 minute for any questions or clarifications you need for Spinoza. Okay. Really, you understood everything? Wave at me if you're good, if you're with me. Okay, I see 1 or 2 people. Okay. All right, good. All right, so next time I'm going to change. Let me stop the recording. Well, actually, let me not. I'm going to change things up a bit. We're going to go to Buber instead of Rosenzweig, right? So we're starting Buber. And as soon as I get back, I am out of town, but as soon as I come back to the city on Monday, I'm going to give you the page numbers. Okay, so then I'll write you an announcement, page numbers that you need to read in Buber. But you can just start reading the whole book. We're going to focus on section 1 and section 3, I believe. So you can already read those in Buber. But we're going to go to Buber and then do Rosenzweig afterwards. So that will be the program. And I'll write up your test also and send it also on Monday. So on Monday, you should get a big announcement with, what's due on Thursday, the test for Spinoza, and so forth. And make sure if you missed the first class that you listen to the recording. And also to this one if you missed this one. Okay, any last questions about what we do? I'll give you an email on Monday so you'll have an update on everything you need to do. For now, just relax. You can read Buber, just have fun with section 1 and 3. Colors. Okay, yes, those of you who have had some problems, the recording, I'm going to post it right now. So you can go back to the recording and get what you missed, okay? Let me stop the recording right now.